What does the divisive comic book film Batman v Superman have to say about war, xenophobia, and the political state of our world today? Find out on today's episode of the PolitiPop Podcast.
Three, two, one.
Welcome to another episode of the PolitiPop Podcast, the podcast where we take your favorite pop culture media and discuss the social and political themes within. You can find us at PolitiPopPod on Twitter. Feel free to email us at politipoppodcast@gmail.com and check out our show notes and sources on politipoppodcast.wordpress.com. This is your host, Mike Booch, and I'm sitting here today with one of my colleagues, Joe. How's it going?
I'm doing great. How you doing today, Mike?
You know what? I can't complain. It's been a long day. But we're here recording this, so I'm happy about that. Now, Joe, before we get started, just give like a little bit of an outline as to where your specialties lie, your education, because you are probably one of the most educated people I know, one of the biggest history buffs ever. So, like, what makes you an authority on what we're about to talk about?
Well, I have a couple of different degrees. I have a degree in finance and economics I got from PACE. Then I got my master's in history and education from CW Post. And I'm currently going to be starting my MBA this spring. So I have a couple of different areas I've worked in, finance and economics, and working in banking, and then education. So with that history background, it certainly helps kind of put things in perspective.
Okay, because I've got a bachelor's in American Studies, and that's about it.
That makes you American.
And and once in a while I'll watch a documentary. So that's like my education. You seem to know everything there is to know about everything.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thanks.
All right. Hey, no problem. I mean, then again, I guess it doesn't take much to impress me. Today's episode, without further ado, will be about Batman vs. Superman. Or is it Batman v Superman?
I'll say Batman v Superman.
All right, Batman v Superman and its correlations to the War on Terror. Now, before we even get to that stuff, what did you think of the movie?
Just looking at it as an outsider, just looking at it as itself and not bringing it back to comics or anything, I thought it was pretty interesting. Something you never think of growing up as a kid, always watching Superman and Batman being friends and the super friends and stuff. Mm-hmm. So to actually see him battle, I thought it was pretty crazy. Something you always talked about as a kid, who'd win in these fights. So I thought from that thing, it was kind of like a childhood dream come true to see an actual battle take place and see who comes out on top. So I was pretty impressed. Like I said, there were some things that were a little weak, but overall, I was just impressed that my childhood, one of those fights I always wanted to see got to happen finally.
I wish I could have come at it with that same filter, but I think in your 20s, you just hate everything. And you always approach it with this contempt, and you're judging it, and you're like, oh, this wasn't good, and everything.
Right.
But
remember, I also grew up with the Superman and Batman that was a little cheesier than the kinds I have now. I didn't grow up with, the Dark Knight and stuff like that. I grew up with, Robin with nipples and, stuff like that. And, Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze, and it's a little campier. Now it's gotten a little more serious, so
that's true.
It's definitely a different way of looking at it.
Now, eventually, we finally watched the Dark Knight Returns animated movies.
Yes.
How do you think those compared?
They're certainly darker, and not even just in the fact that it had no lighting in Batman vs. Superman, but it just was definitely a darker feel to it, grittier. I liked it a lot.
You preferred which?
Oh, the animated shows, yeah. I just thought they were just gritty. Like I said, it's the fact that they didn't light it so darkly in Batman vs. Superman. I think it would have been seen as like a little more of a positive kind of movie. Just the literal darkness kind of made it kind of seem that way, but I felt the grittiness of the animated was really good.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they're going that route with the Justice League flick, so I'm hoping they don't. I've seen enough dark and gritty shit. I read the comics. I've read Frank Miller's Batman. Just give me a good story. You don't need to, like, if I were a child watching Batman v Superman, I would legitimately be afraid. Like, anywhere from the music to Lex Luthor kidnapping Clark's mom and taking like snuff film BDSM porn shots of her,
right?
And being like, oh, look at this Superman, just throw it in his face.
It was kind of like a weird, kind of like a reality show kind of thing too, with that shaky cam kind of thing going on. But I thought it, like I said, it's a little different, like I said, than I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be a little nicer. But like I said, the fact that they were kind of fighting and how gritty it got, I thought it was pretty interesting. I like that.
Yeah, I went into it thinking it was going to be terrible. I liked it. So I was pleasantly surprised. Like, as soon as the dream sequence happened where Bruce Wayne was being elevated to the surface with the bats carrying him symbolically, I was like, oh, okay, it's this kind of movie.
Right.
All right, now I know what I'm in for here. That's fine. So today's episode is about Batman v Superman and its correlations to the War on Terror. That even if you like the movie or you don't like the movie, I think that there's a lot to be said about it. And I feel that it was very obvious that some outsiders come to Earth and they knock down a couple of buildings and they cause disaster, and you have this middle-aged white dude who spends billions of dollars trying to make sure that these other people never do that again. So that was my take on it. Do you think I'm reaching too far? Or do you think that it's pretty obvious?
No, I think it's a theme that you see throughout American history. It's happened with different kinds of immigrants, whether it was Germans coming and Benjamin Franklin saying that we got to build a wall and stop them from coming into Pennsylvania, or Chinese in the West where they had the Chinese Exclusion Acts, the Irish in the East. It's always been something like that, where the new big group that comes is always, these are the ones that are going to ruin it. They're going to make us different than we were. And in this case, it wasn't just a large horde, it was the guy that had the power of a large group. So he was kind of just having like a figurehead of that kind of thought that this unknown mass from someplace else is coming, this horde, and it's going to change us or something, or just corrupt us.
So what the Trump administration thinks that Muslims are. Like, if it was one super Muslim,
right,
who is like coming over here and being as Muslim as possible.
Right. Oh, yeah, definitely. Like I said, I definitely think he sees that as, because he always talks about the good old days of, which I always think he feels like it's like Harriet, like Leave It to Beaver and stuff like that, where he thinks it's this goody time with white picket fences and the dog, the kid with the dog, and they're sitting in front of the fire while the parents read, and just kind of like era that never actually really happened. You know what I'm saying? At least not for the rest of the world. Maybe it happened for him being a rich guy from Queens, but for the rest of the world, especially if you were like a woman, child, minorities, religious minorities, sexual minorities, whatever it happens to be, you would definitely see that as a very repressive time. Because you had to be that clean-cut, WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, otherwise you just weren't able to play the game.
That's perfect, because I'm actually going to talk a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit about it when we come to Batman's section of this, but I found that the easiest way to break up the themes of this movie, because there are a lot, are to break them up according to characters. So you have Superman, you also have Batman, and you have your third parties, which is like Lex Luthor, Doomsday, Wonder Woman. So the first one, we're going to start off with Superman, and we kind of already touched on it, just the theme of the other, and how anything that's different is thought to be dangerous, and that's something that you already touched on it. As I said, I thought that there were some very obvious things. So if we talk about the scene at the Capitol in Washington during Superman's trial, there were noticeably anti-alien signs at the Capitol, and one was specifically a rainbow-colored sign, which is very reminiscent of the Westboro Baptist Church. For those of you who don't know who the Westboro Baptist Church are, they are a hate group who, what would you say?
I'll say they're ultra-conservative, born-again Christians.
Okay. Yeah, so they are, I believe they've actually been labeled as a hate group. And they, I would say, gallivant under the guise of Christianity.
Right.
And their big saying, I think their literal website is godhatesfags.org.
Well, that's certainly one of the biggest sayings they always say everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And they seem to hate gay people the most, but they hate everyone. Like, they'll show up to funerals of, they wanted to show up to the funerals of the Sandy Hook victims and picket that. And they wanted to show up to the funerals of soldiers and say, like, oh, God loves dead soldiers, and that because America has allowed gay people to do its thing, that's why we're being punished. And it's ridiculous. But you don't really have to look far into it for the symbolism like that. Like, there's clearly a rainbow-colored sign that, and I believe it says illegal alien. And at one point, Lex specifically tells Superman that his very existence is a sin. Now, wow, I wrote these notes so long ago, and they're still so so appropriate for today, right? Because at this point, we have a lot of undocumented immigrants that are being rounded up by ICE, who's been coming in full force, to say the least, and going out of their way to deport them from the country. it used to be that it was violent offenders, right?
Yeah.
Did you know anything in particular about that?
Well, that was usually the caveat they used to use when it came to deporting people. Usually, if you were here, usually we're providing some kind of a service, low level, whether it's like a busboy, washing dishes, maybe putting up, sheetrock. And only if you did something wrong, like, drove drunk, obviously, assaulted somebody, robbed somebody, something serious like that. Like I said, for the most part, I always thought if you kept your head down, you worked hard, people wouldn't really harass you. It would be kind of let alone to kind of do your own thing. It just kind of seems like now, like you were saying, with this fervor of, America first and building walls and stuff like that, that he's certainly kind of started to focus on everybody. He's not just kind of focusing on the ones that have done something wrong. He sees it as, you've created the original sin of coming over the border, and now you got to go. It doesn't matter if you've done anything wrong, whether you've been a good person, whether you've got kids, you got to go. And he's basically just going to start looking to clean house, I think.
Well, that's something that I always found interesting, because now it's if you've done something wrong, you're not allowed to be here. But technically, just being here without papers is a crime.
Right.
Right? And that's why they call them illegal immigrants.
Right.
How do you feel about the term illegal versus undocumented? I use undocumented.
Right. I feel the same way, because it is essentially it's paperwork.
Yeah.
So essentially, like, you don't have the required documents. But, like, then that also kind of plays into this weird kind of Nazi thing, like, show me your papers. And like they had kind of with that law they passed in Arizona where people would get pulled over, you had to show your papers. And, how many people walk around with their birth certificate? Even if you are a natural citizen, you're not going to carry it with you. You can have a license, but in a lot of states you can still get a license even if you are undocumented.
Yes.
Where illegal, I think that's more so almost like almost trying to kind of push them even farther down that spectrum to, like, being worse. You know what I'm saying? They're not just, they don't have paperwork, they're illegal. It's like, you're not supposed to talk to them, even interfere with them. You're supposed to kind of quarantine them off and then deal with them, with the appropriate authority. So I think they're kind of even trying to carry a higher stigma for them.
Just existing is the crime.
Right.
Like, can a person's existence be illegal?
It depends on your philosophy. Like I said, for me, I don't think so. I think, essentially, they're man-made lines that were drawn. A lot of them, have moved.
Oh my God, yes.
over time. So, like I said, people complain about Mexicans, but a third of our country was originally Mexico. So, essentially, there were a lot of people that are considered to be now Americans that essentially had a border cross them after the Mexican-American War. So they never, kind of opted in. They just kind of got swallowed. Yeah. So I also think it's just, like I said, improper because it deal with any other species besides humans, and they all migrate. So it's just a simple thing of nature that people move around, whether it's for work, weather. Like I said, there's a lot of them leave because they're, refugees because the war is going on. So you simply would leave. Just like if you were an animal in a forest caught fire, you'd move someplace else. It's just a natural course of nature that you kind of move to kind of keep the ecosystem moving. With us, we just set up these random barriers and have this philosophy of like, I speak with this accent, so you can't come in here. Even though we've lived next to each other for 100 years, you just can't cross the street because now you're, in my space.
It's such a ridiculous thing when you break it down like that.
Right, because we've made everything into possessions. It used to be before, like when the Americans first came, Indians didn't believe in ownership. That's why they would give you stuff, and when they wanted it back, they came from Europe, said Indian gave it because they wanted it back. Meanwhile, they saw it as it's everybody's. You take it, use it when you're done, give it back, then I'll give it to somebody else, and it's kind of seen as like almost like community property. Whereas in Europe, everything had to be labeled and owned, and you had to have a deed and had to have it documented in some kind of government bureau. And so when they brought that here, it was so strange to a lot of the tribes that were in North South America that it kind of caught them off guard and shocked them.
Well, it's so weird. That's a very Buddhist philosophy too.
Right.
That if you have to cross a river, you take the canoe, you cross the river, and then you just leave it there.
Right.
For whoever needs to use it next. Right. And the thought of actually carrying a canoe on your being is ridiculous. The whole idea that physical possessions become a burden.
Right.
And it's so interesting that now you have a group of, I don't want to say a group of people, because it's not necessarily one party. I don't want to say it's the Conservative Party, the Republican Party, because a lot of different groups are at fault here. But you have this idea of this is our country.
Right.
We own it. We want to take this country back. If you're a 70-year-old man, how long do you have left? Right. You want to do all these things in this amount of time that you have, and you don't really give a shit about what happens to the world afterwards, right?
Right.
Think of all the people that are denying climate change.
Yeah, certainly. It's a very short-term way of looking at things. But it's also coming from people that originally took it from somebody else. They just had the physical force to take it and just basically just push them down and, kill basically 98% of them. So basically there's no one left to argue. I mean, because if the same thing happened in any other place now, the UN would be all over it. We'd be saying, hey, you can't invade, Kuwait if you're Iraq, or you can't invade, Ukraine if you're Russia. Mm-hmm. But since it was done at an earlier time, and somehow it's okay because enough time has passed, it's like, it's expired, the limitations have run out. So no backsies,
Mm-hmm. I love how you mentioned refugees, because Superman is a refugee technically, right?
Oh, certainly.
At the time that, at least in the cinematic universe, or in the DC extended universe, they call it.
Right.
Superman, his Krypton was at a period of civil war. Once again, his father was like the only scientist, and there were all these people that did not believe in climate change, which was pretty much the whole thing, right?
Right.
And he was like, "Our world is dying," and they're like, "What? Don't be ridiculous." And there were these people fighting over who takes power on a planet that's going to explode in a fucking week anyways.
Right.
But he was, not only is he a refugee, I think he's a dreamer.
I could definitely see that, yeah. I mean, I would say he's got to be the ultimate refugee, because it's not like he left his land and it's still there. He left and it's no longer around. But certainly, as being someone that came as a child like that and wasn't of their own volition, their parents sent them. So that certainly would be like the equivalent of a dreamer, someone that crossed over that border technically, or came into our...
It wasn't even their choice.
Right, exactly. It wasn't by choice. They were brought, in a way that was not in their control, so they had nothing to do besides go along for the ride and kind of here with no place to go back to. You couldn't even deport him if you wanted to.
Yeah, like where would you send him? And that's and he says in Man of Steel, he goes, he was raised in Kansas. This is American as it gets. Because guess what? In Superman's mind, he is American.
Right.
He is human.
Yeah. Well, I mean, being here at that young of an age, I mean, he doesn't know anything else. He doesn't have, thoughts and dreams of what happened back in Krypton when he was a kid. He doesn't have any kind of memory of going to school or being with his mom there or anything. It's, it's when you get them to come at that young of an age, even though you're not technically, natural born, you're about as American as you can get, because you're basically here from the beginning. He came in like a year old. He doesn't know anything different.
Absolutely.
I do like the fact that he is from Kansas, though, because that's always looked at as being like the ultimate like American thing, kind of like John Cougar Mellencamp and singing about pink houses and Jack and Diane from like the Midwest. Because I think if they would have had him land in, let's say, like New York or L.A., I don't think he would have been seen the same way. I think they had to put him in like his, I don't even know, something like a Sarah Palin would say, like the real America. Where they grow corn and stuff like that, and have silos and pickup trucks. So I think he's definitely looked at as being that all-American boy, like the Oklahoma kid, like a Mickey Mantle kind of a thing.
Superman as a New Yorker would be amazing to see.
Well, I think he becomes a typical New Yorker. They come from the small town, to make it big in the big city. So he kind of does that migration within the country, kind of over to kind of to get out of that small town feel where he feels like they knew who he was, and he wanted to kind of escape and kind of establish a new identity. So it kind of gives him a chance to kind of be reborn in New York.
Well, yeah, but still, like, could you ever just see Clark Kent like be like, "Hey, get the fuck out of my way!" Hey,
oh, he would definitely be from Brooklyn. You know that.
Oh yeah,
he'd be from Brooklyn or something like that. Definitely.
I'm fucking Superman,
yeah, like the wife beater on, something like that.
It'd just be a wife beater with an S on it.
Right, just drinking water all the time,
Or like nowadays, he'd the New York. Well, I can't really say the word on air, but like he'd have like the Timberlands and shit. And,
you never know. He could go skinny jeans, be from Williamsburg. You never know. If he's modern day New York, if he's from the 80s, then he's definitely like a Vinnie Barbarino, super Italian guy eating slices. But if he's nowadays, you never know. He could be a hipster from Brooklyn.
That's true.
Growing his own, his own hops to make his own beer and stuff. You never know.
Superman. I just don't like the gluten.
Exactly. And he curates his own spices and stuff. Definitely.
Turns out gluten, it's kryptonite.
There you go.
Mind blown. So Lex mentions at one point that his father used to wave flowers at a dictator growing up. One, who do you think that dictator was? Do you think that the Luthers are German or Russian or?
I would definitely say it's definitely going to be German.
Okay.
I would think it definitely comes out of probably the northern part of Germany. Being Martin Luther, he's probably also a Lutheran, Protestant. But I think he's definitely waving flowers at Hitler.
Okay. Now, do you think Lex is legitimately afraid of Superman being the next threat, or do you think he's using it as an excuse to get his own way?
I think if you don't know how it's going to turn out in the end, something that powerful showing up, think of it in anything else. If it was just a T-Rex or any other kind of a thing besides, a humanoid, the first thing you do, you would fear it until you kind of see how it reacts with other things and other pieces of the environment. you would automatically fear it. It's just your natural, state to kind of save yourself. Mm-hmm. But I think he sees it as also a way of like a conveyor to kind of get what he wants. And to get his way is by essentially using that as a distraction / a way of getting funding, just a kind of a way, just kind of vehicle to kind of get what he wants by saying, look at him, it's him, it's him. And while he's looking at that, he's doing his own thing on the side, kind of get his way and kind of move things in a direction that he feels is going to be more beneficial to himself.
So that being said, do you think that there's some sort of correlation to the war in Iraq?
Oh, definitely.
Because something happened, an accident, not an accident, a fucking terror attack happened.
Right.
And they said, listen, in order to protect your freedom from this bad thing that happened, we're just going to have to go over there and do a bunch of fucked up shit over there to protect your freedom over here.
Right.
What would you say are the ulterior motives, or were the ulterior motives in going into Iraq?
Oh, I think at first they thought they were going to get the oil. I thought they saw that as a way of just getting in there, getting the oil, and being able to just, get an American company in there. Obviously, Halliburton would do a lot of the technical work, but you'd have Exxon, whoever happens to be, Amoco in there pumping out oil. It'd be the new version of what we had with Iran in the 70s and 60s before the Ayatollah kicked them out. But basically, it would just be a way just to get a grab. Because I think if it was really that way, that they were truly going after terrorism, they would have stayed focused in Afghanistan. They never would have moved over and changed focus. Because Afghanistan had nothing. It was basically a bunch of rocks, and that was it. So there was nothing to take. There was no capital, nothing, of any kind of value. So they turned and basically just said, all right, we'll go take, the whatever it is, second largest, stockpile of oil in the country, in the world, and be able to just, kind of supercharge ourselves with that. Now we have it coming in for pennies on the dollar as opposed to paying, market prices. They'd be able to do at that point whatever they want. At that point, maybe move over one more country and go after Iran, or you can go in another direction. So I think it was definitely a way to kind of get like stockpiles, to move on to continue your later plan that they had in the paper they wrote, the people for a New American Century, where they talk about how they were going to knock over a certain set of countries to kind of remake the world now that Russia was no longer a power. They're basically going to come in and just knock over certain kind of pins, and by doing so, they would change things by taking over large portions of resources, oil, whatever it must be. So they'd be able to kind of have like a corner on the market and kind of be able to keep running without having anybody be able to stop them because they could shut off certain resources.
Joe, I learned so much from you.
Oh, thank you.
On a daily basis.
That comes from reading a lot of history books.
At one point, when Lex mentions the dictator that his father had to wave flowers at growing up, and he says that Superman is that threat. We want to make sure we never have to do that. If you were to describe what our big threat now is in the United States, in our world, what is it? Now, not what you think an actual threat is. What the perceived threat is.
Oh, the perceived threat now is it's going to be international terrorism. Definitely, more specifically Islamic terrorism. That's basically what they.
Don't be afraid to say it.
Right.
Say radical Islamic terrorism.
That's basically why they always want to say it. They always want to keep labeling it, whatever it happens to be. It was always, that's the new boogeyman. Before it was communists. Before that it was, something else. There's always something, immigrants, whatever happens to be. There's always that boogeyman that allows them then to change focus away from other things they want to do. It's like the first thing they've done now that they've started this ban. Now they're also doing things like they're lowering the regulations on coal companies. Now they could dump all these wastes in the river. So now you're destroying the rivers all over Appalachia. And so it's where they get their water from. They're not getting it from, saltwater salination from the coast. It's coming from streams and running through the mountains. And now it's full of rubble from these mountains they're flattening, so they're getting poisoned. So there's stuff like that that's going to set up. You start seeing a lot more deregulation. So this way, lower costs for corporations, but of course they're not going to lower prices for us. They'll just take more of it. So they'll basically just use it as a cover to kind of get other things done. Keep you scared like they did about the communists, and now to keep you scared about this.
Poisoned water. Refer to the last episode of the PolitiPop Podcast where we cover Occupy Avengers, issues 1 and 2, because that is used in there. Okay, so the threat really then in the Batman vs. Superman movie should be radical Kryptonian terrorism. Not all Kryptonians.
Right.
All one of them that are left.
Okay, so I think he's definitely kind of, like I said, he kind of plays him. Like I said, you can see it by the signs. It's like he's the Kryptonian Osama bin Laden. Where they had the pictures of him on there. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, he becomes that singular symbol. It's not something that's amorphous, kind of a thing. It's like there's one picture of this one guy. This is it. Be on the lookout for him.
You know what? That's not even something that I noticed. It's not even. At no point did they say we have to watch out of Kryptonians. It was just specifically Superman. Right. That's and yet somehow they also worshipped him as a hero, which I thought was a weird inconsistency.
Yeah, that's definitely an unusual thing. I mean, I think that's kind of like a dichotomy, and almost like because America is mostly a Christian country, and Islam is also a religion that was born out of Abrahamic religion. So it comes from Judaism to Christianity to Islam. So there is kind of like a sharedness to it, but they never like to seem to admit it. They always treat it like it's like the redheaded stepchild or the black sheep of the family. But they do share a lot of the same things. Right, so they do see it as kind of like a good thing and a bad thing, but they just seem to focus on that one shade of it. So they're just kind of ignoring the rest of it that's kind of familiar to them. And like I said, some people kind of look at it as, a demon, but like I said, some people see it as a positive. Because it is supposed to be a religion of peace. It does do positive things. And I'm saying that they're just pushing the dark side of it. They're not looking at the positive side.
Whereas in this world, there are two sides of it. And somehow Superman is looked at as both a threat and a hero.
Oh, certainly, especially when he does damages to cities and people die that are innocently in the streets.
Well, yeah.
I'm sure that person's family does see him as evil. But the person that gets saved, because he stops something from happening.
When Zod was I'm sure that family, when Zod was about to freaking, laser them all in half, and
right.
Cal snapped his neck. I can call him Cal. We know each other. Cal just snapped his neck right there. They were like, oh. I think maybe we could trust this guy.
Right, yeah. I mean, like I said, it's just the two sides of the one coin. Like I said, what's one person's freedom fighters, one person's terrorist. So in this case, one person that's like the hero,
Star Wars.
Right, can turn around and be, a bad person, like I said, because there is collateral damage to the large scaleness that he works in. So there will always be damage that gets done.
That's very true. So now it's Islamic terrorism in our world, right? What was the big threat before this?
Oh, before this, I would certainly say it was communism.
Communism
was certainly before. I mean, that was basically from the end of World War II up until '89 when the Soviet Union fell. That's why you have that weird vacuum in the '90s where they kind of really don't know what's going on, so they basically don't do much besides kind of go into the Balkans. But communism for about 45 years or so was certainly the bugaboo where they were always talking about how there's communists in universities, there's communists in the State Department, there's communists here, and you always had to be on the lookout. And if you said certain things, people start calling you a pinko. And
it's so crazy how that's the exact same thing that's happening now, and people just can't see the correlation. It wasn't even that long ago.
Yeah, but they see it as so different though. They see it as not even related. They see it as that was well, I guess it's also because it's also seen as being farther away with communism. It was over in the Soviet Union, whereas they see people that are in here that are from, let's say, Syria or other Middle Eastern countries, maybe that came from Iraq, or even ones that came from Somalia that were Muslim. And they see them as invading, which is a kind of a different thing. Whereas with the communists, they stayed over there with the exception of some Vietnamese that came over during the war. So they mostly didn't have it coming. So it was kind of a different in that sense. But like I said, overall, that same kind of fear factor was always pushed and always done. It was even in cartoons, in Bugs Bunny, they would talk about communism and stuff like that.
Of course.
So I don't think you're going to get to that point where you're going to start seeing Saturday morning cartoons talking about Islamic terrorism. But like I said, it's something that can't be far away. You never know.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, so what was it before communism? I'm gonna test you here. What do you think was
before communism? I'd say there's a short spurt of anarchism from Italy. They set off about 200 bombs by Wall Street. So if you compare probably the most bomb-happy ethnicity we probably had in the country, it'd probably be Italians, because mostly it was the anarchists setting off bombs downtown in Manhattan that were doing a lot of the killing.
And yet most of the country right now, especially where we live in New York, Italian.
How American is spaghetti and meatballs, pizza. You know what I'm saying? They eventually, got absorbed just like everybody else did. They brought their own little piece to the country. Everybody loves having cannolis and having stuff like that, and Zeppelis and pizza.
Course. So
now it's American. Before we look at it as being, they said the same thing about everybody else that came. They're all criminals. They're all in the mafia. They're all, lazy. They're not going to work. So they always had the same kind of, things that lay in everybody else, whether you were coming in the, 1800s as an Irish person, same kind of thing. It's always the same kind of things. They're coming over, they're going to bring disease. They're going to, they're going to bring crime. Just like he said when he came down the escalators and he was talking about Mexicans, that they're sending rapists and whatever. They're not sending the best people. But in reality, the people that usually do come are usually the most innovative. They're not coming because it's easy. It's much harder to get up and leave your entire life and come here and start from nothing.
Who could imagine doing that? Even within our own country, to pick up and move to another state is almost an insane thought. You leave your family, you leave everything you know, you leave your job, you leave your school, you leave your friends, maybe a dog. I don't know, man. That is nuts. But to literally pick up and move. And there's probably a lot of people that are coming here right now that I wouldn't say don't want to come here, but it's like you said, they're war-torn countries, and it's like, okay, maybe this isn't the best neighborhood to stay in anymore.
Right, yeah, especially since 2/3 of it's now, rubble. Like I said, ones that are coming over as refugees will return, the majority of them. Most of them usually do. You know what I'm saying? Just from a general immigration in general, they usually come for the better life. They come for the American dream.
Yeah.
They come and open up their little store, whatever it happens to be, whether it's, an Italian opening a pizzeria or someone new now, maybe they buy a gas station or whatever it happens to be, or a little, stationery store. There's always that dream of coming here, and you save some money and you kind of start your new life and kind of start your path down the American dream.
Yeah. Did I ever tell you who one of the most patriotic people I ever met was?
Who's that?
It was my old boss at the Chinese restaurant.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Now me being the liberal 20-something I am, I was always like, yeah, America sucks. And the whole
cynical.
The whole system is shit, and there's disenfranchised and marginalized, and he actually came here from Mexico. He grew up in a village in China where they would march miles a day to collect like firewood and sticks, and then hopefully sell some of it so they can make some food, like money for food. And it was terrible. But he is literally from birth to now one of the hardest working people I've ever known. And literally 7 days a week at this restaurant that was open, and just hours and hours a day. And then after he would work at the Chinese restaurant and close it out at about 10 or 11, he'd go over to his neighborhood in Queens and work as a chef at a bar until 4 a.m.
Right.
Yeah. So it was just one of the hardest working people I've ever known. Point is that I would talk to him about this, and he'd be like, "Oh, well, when I was in China, there was this girl's family. She was really sick. They had to go around and collect money to get into the hospital. She was in there for 3 days until they ran out of money, and then she was kicked out and she died."
Wow.
Yeah. And he goes, "Here, they'll treat you and then bill you."
Right.
He's like, "That's incredible." He goes, "Here, I'm allowed to have credit card debt. I'm allowed to buy stuff." He goes, "I have to pay it off bit by bit, but I can still do it." And he talks about how he got to go to school and he got to work these jobs and this job and that job, and he has been everywhere. His favorite thing to make, steakhouse. He wanted to open up a steakhouse more than anything. And that kind of taught me that I don't think you'll ever find someone that loves America as much as somebody who chose to come here.
Right.
As opposed to somebody who was born here by chance.
I agree. I think so, definitely. I think also, like you said, the opportunities is what draws them here, and that's why they seem to work so hard, because those opportunities aren't back home. So they're always seeing them as, I can't believe I'm getting the chance to do this. Whether it's, like you said, taking out a small business loan to start a business, credit card debt, like I said, being able to get an education without having to pay for it up front. You pay it, in smaller amounts, through your taxes. So it's kind of a different way to kind of do things that gives them opportunities they never would have had at home. So it kind of gives them a chance to kind of get ahead. Whereas before they only would go, each foot that they could dig as far as they went. Whereas now they had somebody that's already plowed it ahead of them, so they're kind of moving along quicker along that kind of life cycle of being able to get their life started. And I think it certainly kind of gives them that kind of, love of the country, because they just can't believe what they're able to do. And, just that's why they kind of do sometimes have, like you said, like kind of more of a love for it because of what they've given them. Whereas when you're born here, you kind of take it for granted. You know what I'm saying?
I take so much of it for
granted.
granted.
I think America is kind of like, you could say, it's like an allegory for Rocky. When we first started, we were the up-and-comer. We fought hard. We had the eye of the tiger, and now we've kind of gotten fat and lazy. And
are we Rocky 3 or are we?
I don't know. I don't think we've run up against Clubber Lang yet. We haven't gotten knocked out, but we've certainly gotten beaten up, and we have faced a couple of what they would call palookas, kind of setups where it was easy to win, so we make ourselves look good. So we'll fight Iraq and stuff like that. Look how tough we are. We beat a country that
So was you saying those fights was fixed, Mickey?
Exactly.
Nah, but they weren't hungry like you.
They were has-beens. Exactly. So I think we're definitely kind of in that kind of life cycle where we're definitely kind of on the downturn a little bit, because we kind of need that new refreshing. We need that. That's why we need the occasional big injection of immigrants to kind of give you that life again and give you that back to eye of the tiger. They want to drive. They want to start a new business. Whereas most kids now, when you talk to them, they don't want to start a business. They want to go work for, the new tech company and do whatever. And they don't want to do it on their own. They kind of want to work for somebody else because it's easier. I'll just do 9 to 5 and I'll come home. Nice and easy. I'll cash my check. I don't have to worry about doing, like you're saying, you're finished working, 12 hours a day. You know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. Well, you get that kind of work ethic when you came from somewhere where you had nothing and you would have died to work. You come here, and then the fact that you can get all this work that you want as long as you're willing to do it, someone will always pay you to do it.
That's very
true. So it
true.
definitely kind of gives him that kind of that angst, that kind of push and drive that, like I said, kind of the Americans have gotten a little soft with, I think.
Now, since I worked for him, they actually sold the business.
Oh.
Yeah. The last thing I heard about my old boss, aside from selling the restaurant, do you know what he's going to do next?
Go to the moon? I don't know.
He's going to join the army.
No, really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Before he had papers, he really wanted to join, but he wasn't a citizen, so they wouldn't let him.
Okay.
But he said, I want to fight for this country.
Wow.
Yeah. He wanted to throw his life down.
That's putting your money where your mouth is.
It really is. When Lex mentioned why he's going to need kryptonite, he says they want it as a deterrent. Not as a weapon, but he wants it as a deterrent so that way they won't have to depend on the kindness of monsters. Now, whereas he says it's going to be just that, just a deterrent, just something, just in case, to kind of keep Superman in place. Even though he doesn't really know that they have it until later on. I think that was very reminiscent of the arms race and how you may not necessarily go to war, but just the threat of war is enough to keep people in check. It's a very fragile kind of peace.
Right. It's basically just like almost like a Mexican standoff. That's what they basically had. They both just stood standing with guns in each other's face, and you just assume the other guy would never fire because if he did, he'd do the same and you'd both die. So I definitely think it was definitely kind of positioned as that way, as we'll never really have to use it because he's not crazy enough to come after us if we have this, and we're not going to go after him because we're the good guys. So we'll just basically just, kind of stay in this kind of mutual agreed peace, kind of like
quote unquote.
Right, like well, basically, like I said, it's mutually assured destruction. MAD. That's what the whole nuclear kind of deterrent was. That only a madman would ever do it because you'd end up basically killing 2/3 of the world. So essentially, you have these things pointed at each other, and no one will ever fire them because if you do, everybody dies. So you're never going to do it. So kind of defeats the purpose of having them, but you have them just so people feel a little safer and they sleep a little better in their beds.
Ironic, right?
Yeah.
You feel a little better knowing that you have guns pointed at each other.
That's why everybody had a bomb shelter because they weren't too stupid. They want to make sure in case someone did go crazy, they had a place to hide.
So we don't have to worry about a madman in power now, right?
Oh well, you never know. Sometimes these angry orange guys go a little crazy. The angry Cheeto.
Hey, listen, I will not have you smearing Oompa Loompas on my podcast. What was the situation with Reagan and Gorbachev? They had a summit, right? In Reykjavik?
Right, Reykjavik in Iceland, yeah.
Oh, damn, that's good. God, you even know where the fuck it is, man.
It's actually a lot of fun. It's a very fun city. I went there on the way to Amsterdam.
Wow.
It's a big party city, Reykjavik, yeah.
I guess that's why they have the meeting there.
Well, yeah, that's one of the big things. It's also the land of fire and ice. That's what it's always known as. A lot of volcanoes, glaciers, and stuff. So it's a very cool country.
Oh wow!
Yeah, big partying and a lot of crazy stuff going on. So it's always a lot of fun.
So the whole talk between the two of them there was to kind of settle the whole thing and be like.
Well, basically, they were looking to come to like a nuclear arms agreement as well as a reduction. So they were looking to basically.
It was also a reduction. That's
right. They were looking to stabilize and then starting to kind of bring them down because you don't really need to kill the world 8 times over. 4 is okay. So they basically just look to reduce and each time they get together they would try to go a little smaller. So since they were the ones so far in ahead, whereas we had thousands, where third place was like England with like 150. So. We kind of just needed to just kind of step it back a bit to kill the world only 4 times. So that's why they had to, their little meeting to get together to kind of try to, take 1 or 2 guns off the table. So this way they didn't blow too many holes in each other.
Interesting. So who do you think, in this case, is more powerful in the arms race? Is it Lex Luthor with a chunk of kryptonite or Superman?
Wow.
Now let's say Lex Luthor has the entire, in the DC extended universe, you have Lex Luthor and let's say Superman goes rogue. You have Lex Luthor and you have the whole U.S. government. And you have Superman.
I don't know. I gotta think it's gotta be Lex and the government. I think because as you see in the movie when they set off the nuke, he's kind of messed up.
That's
he's out in space.
One nuke fucking destroys Superman.
And he's just messed up. He looks like he got the life sucked out of him. So you can imagine if they have all of them. And then they throw kryptonite tipped ones, then he could be a nice knockout blow.
That's true. Yeah, I'd have to say they do it. And think of all the damage Batman does to him.
Right. Yeah.
and
he's just a dude with like a great R&D.
Yeah.
You know?
Ooh, which we're going to talk about in a little bit too, which is awesome. The devils come from the sky. What did you think of this? Where Lex says he's talking to Mrs. Incredible, Elastigirl. You know, she voiced Elastigirl.
Really?
Yeah, she was the mom of The Incredibles. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
I noticed that.
Oh yes, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. When you hear her voice, with a little twang in it.
Right.
And he's talking to us. I know that devils don't come from beneath us; they come from the sky.
Right.
How did that ring to you? I know exactly what it meant to me.
I mean, I think it kind of feeds into a lot of things. I mean, it feeds into, you know, like dropping bombs in World War II over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, dropping nuclear bombs, or just the bombing of Berlin and bombing of London, and just how, you know, the chance of them rolling up in tanks and destroying cities isn't as likely as them to come bombing you either with planes or with intercontinental ballistic missiles. So I think they always see it as, you know, almost like even before that with God raining down fire and brimstone on, you know, Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, he did pull that shit.
You know, damage, it comes from the sky. You know, whether it's the comet destroying the dinosaurs or whatever. It's just, you know, it's always this thing that comes from outside of us. It comes down and destroys us.
So I love that you brought up the Bible, because it's like saying God is in the sky.
Right.
But God's wrath is represented by the raining down.
Oh yeah, whether it was fire and brimstone, rain, and the flood for Noah, yeah, it certainly comes down from above. He unleashes it from his kingdom, you know, in the clouds. So whether it's, you know, like I said, you know, an asteroid, you know, whether it's, you know, 7 plagues like frogs and whatever, you know, rain like blood, you know, it always comes from above. It always seems to just always be coming down on people, like, and they're helpless to ever do anything about it.
I love that. In my whole academic experience of proving a point, the only thing that I thought of was, which is why I'm glad to bounce this off of you, was the 9/11 imagery, which is very prevalent in this film.
Right.
And obviously you have the devils come from the sky, in which at the beginning of the movie we see Zod and Superman fighting it out and literally crashing through buildings, along with the debris from one of the ships that they were in. But that rang very reminiscent to me of where did those planes come from.
Right. Oh, certainly. Like I said, with 9/11, that's certainly something, because I said it was and also such a high building. Everybody, you saw the pictures, everybody's looking up into the sky. So it's, yeah, certainly it was always, you know, with the debris raining down and, you know, just like you said, just, you know, destruction came from above. You know what I'm saying? Something, you know, even something that was seen as a positive, airplanes, to be turned into a negative like that and used, you know what I'm saying, for destruction.
Even airplanes, level. Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, to be killed by something that you always thought was being, you know, nothing really thought about. You know, to be turned against you like that.
Where were you when the world stood still?
I was in Hoboken, New Jersey.
Really?
Yeah. I was at my friend's house that morning. I was off because I had helped him move. So I was just hanging out at his apartment. He actually went to work that morning. He left his cell phone. So I wasn't even awake. My friend's mom called. His cell phone was there, so I picked it up. She's like, "Oh, where's Chuck? Where's Chuck?" And I'm like, "He went to work." And I didn't.
Where did he work?
He worked on West Broadway, so like 2 blocks from the World Trade Center.
Shit.
Yeah. I worked in the World Financial Center. So I was that glass buildings under the World Trade Center. That's where I was.
No,
that's
way.
Yeah, I worked for Nomura Securities in there. Yeah. So I was, you know, like I had friends that walked into the World Trade Center and walked right out. I had my friend Kevin that worked in there, and he just walked in and walked right out of the building. So yeah, I have a bunch of friends that
walked in, and then the shit happened, and he was like, "Oh."
Yeah, walked in and just walked right out of the revolving doors. Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah, line locked. Like I said, my friend Chuck came home soaking wet because he had, you know, gotten out of his building, was walking away, but he got hit by the dust cloud. So he was covered and had to tow in that, you know, pulverized cement. So he came home wet because they had to hose him off. So yeah, so I had several friends that worked on it. I probably had about 8 friends that worked on Wall Street, different areas.
Shit.
But yeah, and after that happened, we never worked down there again because we all got sent to different areas in what they call the disaster recovery. So I was in New Jersey. He went up to Pleasantville and Westchester because that's where all their disaster sites are out of, you know, what would obviously be the main target after the first bombing. So we all got scattered to the wind, and as time went on after that, we all slowly got out of the industry. But yeah, I had a bunch of friends that were down there at the time, but luckily they all got out. I actually don't know anybody that passed away in it.
Wow, I was 11 years old, and I was in Mr. I was in Mr. Kasdan's class, science class, second period in middle school. And I mean, it wasn't ever something that really resonated with me.
How did they tell you? The loudspeaker?
Well, no, the teachers came into the rooms, or guidance counselors or whatever they were, staff. They came in and they asked for, they asked like, oh, does anyone here have family who works in the World Trade Center? And
really?
I think there were a couple of kids. I was like, oh, I do, blah, blah, blah. And then they were like, okay, can you come to the office with us? And then eventually, holy shit, I've never processed it until now. This is it. This is an iconic moment. And then eventually, we heard what had happened. And the teacher, who's the adult, who's supposed to know everything, who's supposed to know what to do, he went to the computer and looked up, I want to say, I'm not sure if it was, but I'm pretty sure it was CNN.com, which, as we know, is the fakest of all
news.
Fakest of all news now. But yeah, he went to the computer and he looked it up, and he said, yeah, a plane crashed into the World Trade Center, and
right.
And this was said a lot, and I think it still holds true. At that time, I had seen Independence Day, in which the White House gets blown up. At that time, I'd seen a lot of movies in which things get blown up or destroyed, disaster films, Godzilla. So it was one of the, at least at the time, I guess, rare occasions of life mimicking art.
Right.
Of life mimicking something, art's a fucked up thing to say, of life mimicking something that isn't real, of life mimicking fiction, when that comes into our world. And I was just too young to process it.
Right.
I'd never even been to the World Trade Center.
Right.
I'm not even sure that I'd ever been to New York City at that point.
Right.
So my father was very messed up by it. I know
Right.
I mentioned last episode, PolitiPop Podcast, episode 2, Occupy Avengers, issues 1 and 2, that my father came here when he was a kid, and I said in the episode he was 11 years old. He was actually 9, and he told me how he felt, and he said that he grew up looking at those two towers, looking up at those towers, and he had been all throughout the boroughs, living there and going around with his friends and everything, and he was really fucked up by it.
It's definitely, when you work in that area, it's a big center point, because we used to go to the mall underneath it. In the plaza in between them, they'd have bands play. I remember going down to the beach here, down in Babylon. You could go to the beach and you'd be able to see them from the beach.
Wow, really?
Because they were so big. Yeah, I remember taking pictures when I was a kid, and you could see them sticking up because they're so much bigger than everything else. You could just see that they were just kind of this iconic view of just New York. It was easy to tell where things were in New York, because you could see the World Trade Centers in the south. You can see the Empire State Building in the middle, so you can judge where things are. So, like I said, to have that kind of iconic, landmark, marker kind of in New York disappear was certainly very strange. Like I said, because we used to always just hang out there all the time. We used to, go eat lunch in the park right next to it. And, when we found out later on that the statue, we would sit around. This little guy with his legs crossed and a briefcase on his lap was like 3 blocks away. He got blasted so far away that we just couldn't believe it. The globe that was there that the bands would play in front of, there's like a big giant globe that's now down in Battery Park. Got completely, it was like a round soccer ball, got dented and also got knocked a few blocks away. And so to come back and see later on like what happened to it, it was really weird. I mean, not as strange as coming back and seeing the hole. That was a whole nother thing. That's just, you can't even imagine something that huge being gone. I mean, I've had dinner in there. I went to the Windows of the World restaurant on the top, where the restaurant would actually spin, so you could see the entire view from the top of the building. So like I said, it was, when you work down on Wall Street in that area, that was a pretty popular area for a lot of things, for, stores and just places to eat and congregate and hang out. So to have it disappear like that, and not even just like, it got taken down, they put something else up, to have it just wiped out in a day, and then just have this hole that was there for years, where when you take the PATH train from Hoboken, we would take the PATH in, you would kind of go through the hole, and you would see into the hole, and it would just turn as it goes through it, and you would just constantly just see it. It was, I don't even know. And then
how do you go back to like life after that?
It's so weird.
It's like pretending.
Yeah. Right. And then you go upstairs and there's these people that are upstairs like taking pictures in front of it. And you're like, the people died there. I mean, I couldn't imagine taking a picture like a tourist in front of it, like you're in front of like a statue or something like that. They were taking
It's
pictures.
like those people now that they took pictures, but in the Holocaust Remembrance Museums.
Right, exactly.
Like
How do you take a picture like it's some kind of like it's a tourist trap or something? Like it's like you're standing next to Spider-Man in Times Square to be standing in front of this grave, essentially what it would be for thousands of people. I mean, it would make you mad. I mean, I never said anything to anybody, but if I did, I probably would have knocked them out because it would bother me so much.
Well, once you start, I mean...
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was just such a disturbing thing that... And it was mostly people from out of town that didn't know, and it was, you know what I'm saying? So they don't have the connection to it that we had, but it was just such a surreal thing to see that kind of posing in front of it, you know, and just...
Wow.
Like I said, and then to see it every time going to work, you know, when we moved back, you know, we were in a new building, but we had to still take the PAT trainer from Hoboken. It was weird to just keep going through that hole, essentially, and just looking in and seeing how they're cleaning it out, and then they kind of sandblasted the walls, and you see the progress of them trying to fix it, but it just took so long. It was just weird, just kind of almost like seeing like an open like wound in like in Manhattan for that long, and just, you know, you wanted it to be fixed. I wanted them to put it back the way they were, just kind of offset them so that the original footprints would be the memorial, and just kind of have the two buildings put back and just kind of turned and offset so they'd be next to the old ones, you know, as kind of like a, you know, a symbol of, you know, knock me down, you know, I'm back up, what we can do now.
I think two awesome middle fingers, too,
right?
right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, two fingers up to them. Yeah. Definitely, like I said, it was definitely something
Why
I thought.
not, right? Why not just build them?
That's what I thought. But like I said, they wanted to go with the whole motif of freedom. And
memorial.
It's now 1,776 feet for 1776. So that whole symbolism like that, which I think is great too. But I just thought it should have been almost just like, you know, we're back just like we were before, you know, just a little bit different.
Which, if we relate it to Batman vs. Superman, they have that. They have a memorial. They have a whole wall to everyone who was lost in the Metropolis incident. And they have the Superman statue there. And they actually never cleaned up the ship.
Right.
In 2 years, the ship that crashed there. Because that's what Lex... It's still under quarantine. That's what Lex uses. So... Wow, okay, I didn't even think of that until now, but it's the same thing, right? That ship is still there in the middle of Metropolis.
Yeah.
You know, so everyone sees that.
Right, it's a reminder every day of what happened. That they basically have to walk past or see every day. You know what I'm saying? Just a constant reminder of the devastation that happened. You may have fixed other things, like I said, you put up a statue, but like I said, there's still this giant gash that this ship created and all the damage it wrought.
And it's so interesting because I think as a metropolitan, is that what you would call a metropolis resident?
Yeah.
Yeah, that walking by, they would see two different things. Or maybe both at the same time. They could see this terrible scar on the face of their city, or they could see that Superman statue and remember the one who saved them, the one who helped them.
Right.
And because when we think about that, right, 9/11 is remembered, I think, most strongly by first responders.
Oh,
which
certainly.
we'll talk a little bit about in the next episode with the Batman side of it, in which, you know, firefighters and cops and EMTs and ambulance, everything, that there was a lot of bravery.
Oh, certainly.
That day.
Oh, yeah. That's when I think people felt the most patriotic, when they saw people risking their own lives for strangers. I mean, I remember hearing stories about people here in my town. They have two blocks in my town that are named after people that worked for the FDNY that were off duty and all went in, even though they weren't supposed to. Like I said, just because they felt they had to.
Wow.
So whether it was cops or firemen, yeah. Certainly.
That's so it's so amazing and it's so heartbreaking at the same time, I think. Because how often do you see another person in New York City and they're like, fuck you, you know, like
right.
We, you know, for the most part, and it might not just be New York City, it could probably be everywhere, all of humanity now. How much do we really give a fuck about each other?
Right. Well, New York always gets that kind of bad rap of always being cold. Like I said, and I think we do have that kind of hard exterior, but I think we are softer inside. Because you say we will have the guy that yells, you know, fuck you, whatever, on the street, but then you will have someone that stops and helps the person, that the tourist, find their way to go and let them know what subway to take. So we do kind of let that, you know, other side of us come out. Like I said, but I do think, like I said, also kind of got a little more love from the rest of the country, because we always seem as being, you know, we're the loudmouth, you know, New Yorkers and whatever. And I think at that point people kind of saw us, instead of being New Yorkers, we were all Americans, I guess you would say.
Wow, and that's amazing, because all of America says that day we were all New Yorkers.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. As far as digressions goes, I think that might be the best one I've had so far.
Oh, thank you.
On this podcast. So just the idea that these devils do come from the sky, and Superman hypothetically being one of those devils, do you think that humanity has a reason to be afraid of the Superman?
I definitely think you should always have a certain level of skepticism about no matter what it is, whether it's the thing that you always think that's going to bring peace, whether it's him, the nuclear bomb, because there's always, you always see it in stories of the good thing that turns bad or turns on its owner, whether it's a dog or whatever it is. So you should always have a certain sense of your guard up at all times. I don't think you could ever fully kind of just give up, your defensiveness and just totally give into its protection. That's just my personal opinion. I think you always have to have that.
You don't have to depend on the kindness of monsters, like Lex said.
Certainly, like I said, just in anything. Like I said, in New York, I know the chance of me ever getting pushed in front of a subway is very slim. But when the train comes, I always take a step back and make sure to see if there's anybody behind me. It's just, I guess maybe it's being in New York where we had that automatic paranoia or something. Or, like I said, you always have that skepticism, always just watching your own back and make sure that nobody has, a weird position on you that you feel vulnerable. So you're always making sure you stand in front of the column so nobody can be behind you or whatever it happens to be. Or
That's
you
always
just
what
turn.
I've done, yeah.
No, you turn, so your back's against the wall and you can see everybody in front of you. It's just always like a natural instinct that I've always felt that a lot of people have, especially here in New York.
Well, from a martial arts standpoint, that's something I was always taught. Like, always have your back covered. Always, like, you'll notice whenever we go out to places, I always sit facing the entrance.
Right.
So I know who's coming in. Or I'll sit where I can see a reflection or something like that. If anything does go wrong, am I going to be the superhero that's going to save everybody and spring into action? Probably not. But I'll at least be looking at the person when I get shot through the skull.
Exactly.
I do think that they have a right to be afraid of Superman. I think it's only fair, and I think it's only sane.
Right.
But to take other steps is immoral. There's, at the end of one of the comic books I read, The Killing Joke, Batman, there's this little aside at the end of the story. And this guy, he says anything that's done out of fear is immoral. Because it's not something you really believe in, it's something you're kind of doing out of desperation.
Right.
And I think that is the same thing, that if you do something out of fear, it's not just immoral, it's irrational. Because when you think back and you're like, oh, I don't know why I did that.
Right, usually after the fact is when you realize that your fear wasn't as real as you thought it was.
Yeah, and do we think that Batman in here is acting out of fear or out of concern, out of justice? I personally feel that he's acting out of fear, which is very uncharacteristic of Batman, which is why we see a lot of uncharacteristic Batman things in this film.
I can definitely see that. I also think that when it comes to the people, I think their fear is, I think, also kind of justified, and that they don't like to put too much into one thing. Into one savior, I guess you said that we always want to have like a diversification of safeguards. So to have that one person, like I said, even if
that one thing turns on you,
it doesn't even turn on you. What if it fails?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Then you have nothing. So I definitely think they should always have that certain level of fear, like you said, because you don't know, like I said, if it turns on you, or if, let's say, it isn't there when you need it to be. What if that day he's hanging out with Lois up in the Fortress of Solitude? Having a nice little quiet couples weekend. You don't know. Unless it may not be a huge thing like aliens show up, but it could be something smaller, in that sense, like an earthquake in New York or something like that, or in Metropolis that ends up doing huge damage. Like in a movie where he might spin the world backwards and undo the earthquake.
Well, Lex Luthor's take on it in the comics, I want to say it was All-Star Superman. I'm not positive, but his whole take on it was that Superman's existence stops people from attaining their true greatness.
Oh yeah, I could definitely see that, because it gives you a certain level of comfort, so you don't push yourself, because you're like, hey, what do I got to do? We got Superman.
Exactly. It's the whole idea, I don't have to worry about it because he'll always save me, or even, why should I try to be better when someone like that is out there?
Right. It kind of raises the bar to a level that most people feel they can't attain then.
Yeah, and that's a big theme in the comics with Batman too. There's a whole book series known as Gotham Central, which is about the Gotham City Police Department and how they, with every case, are busting their asses to try and beat Batman to it, because there needs to be confidence restored within the police department again.
Right.
And it's a morale thing. And if this fucking guy keeps doing better than us, what does that mean about us?
Right.
So they kind of push themselves to be better. I definitely think that they should be afraid of Superman. Not afraid to the point that you build kryptonite weapons to use against him, But I think, like I said, it's only rational.
Yeah, I definitely think, like I said, I think there is a certain level of skepticism you should have in that security blanket, and always have a certain level of preparedness in case of its failure, turning, whatever it happens to be. I mean, I think in many other situations, you might have that backup in this case, maybe a kryptonite weapon, because let's say you have the guard dog, you might still have a shotgun to protect your house, or, along with your ADT alarm system, you'll have the backup to the backup. You know what I'm saying? So I could certainly see it. Like I said, it's just when they get it to the point where, you're
not being defensive, you're being offensive.
Right, exactly.
In preparation of an imaginary attack.
Right, at that point, it's almost turning into Minority Report pre-crime. We got to get him before he gets us.
Exactly.
Kind of a thing. So you're essentially starting the fight that you think is going to happen, which may never happen. So you're almost like making your own thing come true because you're causing it.
Yes. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was how Superman does get turned against Batman. We find out in the extended edition that it's because Lex Luthor has been manipulating the both of them by the super advanced tactic of just sending fucking article clippings with red marker and going
snail mail,
judge, jury, and executioner. It was ridiculous. I also love how Lex Luthor was able to find out. Who Clark Kent is, while nobody else could figure it out.
Oh, despite the fact Google, that, I guess.
Yeah, he never wore glasses as Clark Kent. Lois Lane found out who he was in 2 or 3 days in Man of Steel, and then he even tells General Swanwick, "Oh, I grew up in Kansas, bro."
Right. Put it on the DL.
Yeah, it's not hard to find out who he is and ask him, "Hey, dude, do you want a job? Working for the government?"
Right.
But yeah, Lex eventually does turn Superman against Batman to the point that Superman, he's the one that kind of initiates the fight part of it.
Right.
Where Batman rounds that corner after decimating a whole city block with his Batmobile and runs into Superman. And he's like, listen, the next time that light shines in the sky, don't go to it.
Right.
The correlation that I drew with this was, let's say that Superman represents an American Muslim in this film. This is people being recruited to ISIS. That's what because all right. Let me break it down. Right. So in our world, you have people you have ISIS who is like, hey, listen, these people don't want you. These people hate you. These people will kill you. They'll kick you out of your country. Come to us. Come where you have family. Fight these infidels. Fight these bad people.
Right.
And there's actually quite a few, if you look at some of our sources or in the show notes when you go to the website, you'll see that there are some interviews with all American girls who actually went over to ISIS. And they found out it wasn't as great of a time as they were promised, but they ended up becoming like little ISIS wives.
Right.
Because whatever they were selling, I guess, was a little bit better than what they had.
Right.
In this case, Lex does a similar thing where he appeals to your sense of justice. He appeals to Superman's sense of justice. How can you, Superman, let Batman roam around killing people and doing what he does? His one-man reign of terror.
Right.
Right. That was what I kind of thought of it. How did you look at it?
I definitely can agree with that. I definitely think it can be seen as a connection to the recruitment of it. I also see it. I guess you say a little bit differently in that I think that it is the way he's doing it. He's kind of almost playing like on their want of Americanism and stuff like that, and saying that like you said he's the there's always the enemy so whether it's him playing against them, the Batman creating his one man reign of terror, but then also you have the the alien that's coming from above. So he's always kind of keeping the two faces kind of flipping back and forth. That's why I think, like I said, something as simple like he was getting him goaded into the fight with simple things with, articles or writing those things on paychecks and stuff like that. It is almost like he was sending like tweets, just to piss him off. It seemed to me it was almost like childish, almost like a kid. But like I said, it's just something you just can't when you're getting poked like that. I think of a person of that kind of power, it's very hard for them not to react. So I think
Yes.
He felt like he had to, so he had to do something. So he did feel like a certain need to, but then also having this thing kind of poking at him, I think made him kind of act that way as well, and go out and, like you said, tell him, when that comes up again, don't come out, stay in your little cave because you don't want to come, deal with this, So I thought it was definitely a very, I guess that's why he's Lex Luthor. He's so incredibly brilliant, the way he kind of plays both sides with almost the same point.
Yeah.
He's kind of getting him to kind of go, because once, Batman gets challenged like that, he's not going to back down.
Oh, yeah.
You tell him to go home, he's like, I ain't going home. Are you kidding? I'm talking to Batman.
Yeah.
Exactly. So at that point, he's almost kind of reminds me of like a puppet master, the way he's kind of like playing him with that one turn. He kind of almost gets them both to be bulls in a ring and seeing red in each other. So they both are almost just at that point just start circling each other at that point, and he just kind of sits back and just watches. Yeah, and just watches the show.
That's awesome. That's such a great analogy. I loved how you also related it to, because it's very simple. You write some shit on a check and you send it to Bruce Wayne. You write some shit on an article with a Polaroid because he loves his Polaroids. He's such a fucking hipster in this movie. Whatever. He sends it to Superman. Almost as simple as sending a tweet, right?
Yeah.
So you have this totally white, entitled, childish brat in a position of power, goading people with a few words here and there, tweet and telling you who your enemy should be.
Right.
I wonder why that sounds so familiar to me.
I don't know.
I wonder, did anyone say that the mainstream media is the enemy of the people recently, or the enemy of America?
I may have heard that somewhere. Yes.
God, I just wish I knew. I'm thinking of the color orange, maybe because Lex Luthor has orange hair. I don't know. It's just nuts to me. Another thing that related to this was that there was there's this article about anti-Trump protesters who are bussed into Austin.
Right.
There's apparently protesters that are getting bussed into things that are there just to start trouble, which the article was eventually debunked. Do you think that there's people on both sides of this, on the left and the right, that are trying to make things happen to prove their points?
Oh, there's always some set of agitators. Whether it's on the right, we had that one guy making up the fake videos on Planned Parenthood, or on the left, whenever they have protests, they always have those professional anarchists that come out and start smashing Bank of Americas and stuff like that. So there's always people on both sides. They usually are at the extreme. That's why they're out there, because they usually are going to a level where nobody else does. Like I said, most of the time, people are just looking to march, whether it's for, immigrants, freedom, stuff like that, or whether it's Black Lives Matters, stuff like that. And there'll always be some small little group that sees themselves as being hardcore for this one thing, and so they're going to take it to the next level. And by doing that, they're going to get a response back from the other side that they think is then going to show. I think in their mind, they think they're going to get on the news, kind of like it was in the 60s with dogs attacking kids. They're going to get, they're not going to get seen for throwing the first punch. They're going to get seen when they get hit back, and they're going to get on the news, and then all of a sudden they'll be, oh, look at these people, we need to help them. Meanwhile, they're, in a sense, I wouldn't say as bad, but close to as bad as the people that are causing the problem, because they are instigating it. So essentially, by throwing that first punch, you kind of lose the higher ground. You lose the moral high ground. Yeah. Where if you were marching like Martin Luther King, or like they were doing Black Lives Matters, or like say for for women's rights after the inauguration, they're doing it for getting rid of the ban. It's just that when someone steps out and does something more extreme, it kind of disenfranchises the rest.
And they become the face of it.
Exactly. They lose that much larger message that the 98% of the people that are there are doing, because this one person is stepping out and doing this outrageous thing. And I'm sure they're not doing it to destroy it. They think they're going to take it to the next level, but in a sense, they end up poisoning it.
Yeah.
Because then everyone ends up saying, oh, it's all about these people, they don't have jobs, they just go around destroying stuff, and you kind of basically destroy your own message.
Yeah, I think it's so much easier for the people that are in power to keep us fighting with one another. In this case, it's Lex, and it's easier for him to keep Batman and Superman at each other's throats while he works on doing his thing, which I guess is just Doomsday or whatever, and blowing up the whole Capitol. But it's sad, I guess, because a lot of conversations I have, not on Facebook, but with people who have more right-wing views in person, we end up agreeing on quite a bit, just based on what we're talking about and the way that we say it.
Right.
And we end up agreeing on a lot of stuff, but that's not what benefits the 1%.
Right.
Us getting along doesn't benefit the 1%.
Right. Well, because then you might turn your focus towards them.
Exactly.
But I think, like you said,
numbers.
Right. I think most people do agree on what the end goal is. That they want to have, better prosperity for people. It's just the difference is how do you get to that point? You know what I'm saying? So it's like move a bed from one room to the other. One group wants to try to move it in one piece, so it's quicker. Some groups want to take it apart and move it over piece by piece, which may take longer.
But so the goal is still the same.
It's still the same goal. You still want to have, raising income, less poverty. It's just that people want to do it differently. Some people want to do it by giving people, tax credits, or do it by, welfare. Some people say, oh no, you just give them job training, let them go get a job and pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But they still want to get the same thing done. It's just that they just focus on the fact that we're bickering over the little details of how you drive from point X to point Y. You know what I'm saying? Instead of kind of focusing on the long-term goal and keeping that long-term goal in focus and focusing on that, they're basically constantly focusing on the kids fighting in the back seat over something stupid. So like you said, you basically, distract them from accomplishing this goal by focusing on this constant fight. Like Jon Stewart said on Crossfire, you guys aren't helping the problem. You are the problem because you're not, helping us solve things. You just focus on the fight, the drama. And that's why you'll always see on the news, you'll always see two people that just basically just yell at each other and talk over each other. There's never anybody that talks about, how you're going to solve this. Yeah, so it just kind of becomes a distraction. So like you said, so at that point, then like we talked about earlier, then you get into deregulation. You get, whether it's the big banks, doing with the mortgages that they did before, they always, use distractions of other things to get these other, goals, which usually has to do with money, accomplished. So they kind of use it as a distraction to start undercutting, people that are of a lower income status, which I think is the real focus. I mean, They always like to pit religions versus each other, races versus each other, when in reality it should be more likely, economics.
A class thing.
Right, more class, basically 98% versus 2% or 99 versus 1.
The college tuition is too high.
Exactly.
That's my Bernie.
My brother Bernie.
Yeah. So, do you think that the kryptonite represents, which I think we already spoke a lot about beforehand, but do you think the kryptonite represents anything?
I think it can kind of represent two different things. It's almost like this, we want to call it the nuclear bomb of World War II, the fix-all, end-all, because it could defeat Superman. Mm-hmm. But it's also, like you said, by having these weapons of mass destruction, it's also your own corruption, because you are taking it to that next level and becoming offensive instead of purely defensive. So it is the thing that will save you, but it's also something that's going to corrupt you at the same time. So it kind of has that kind of, benefit. Like you said, like maybe people say it about technology all the time. It makes your life easier, but it also destroys a lot of things that you used to love that you had as a kid.
Yes,
because you don't do them anymore. True. So it's kind of like that weird thing where you may not have known you needed it, but once you got it, you can't do without it. But then you realize, I got this new phone that I can't stop staring at, but I'm not talking to my friends.
Oh, holy shit!
But I couldn't live without it though. I gotta have it. I gotta know what this idiot's tweeting about. I gotta see what's going on with Christina Grande or whoever it is, Ariana Grande. Like you said, so you don't have that same connection you have with friends. You don't talk as much. Certainly not in person.
We're more connected, right?
Right.
Never have we been
more alone at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think it is the blessing and the curse at the same time.
One thing that I thought about is it kind of represents this resource. You could say it's oil or what have you, a resource that people are fighting over, because it was something that was found, in kind of nature, in the ocean and everything. It was a leftover from one of the world engines, that was terraforming for Man of Steel, and Lex gets it. Lex goes through a whole thing to get it. He goes through all these legal loopholes and everything to get this one resource. But you know who else is searching for it? Batman.
Right.
So he freaking, he destroys all of Lex's people to get this weapon and builds, to get this stone. And what does he build from it? He builds a kryptonite spear. He builds a kryptonite gas canister, but only 3. And that was it, right? I think that's all he did.
Right,
Lex made a scalpel.
Right. Well, he made the, it was a gas-tipped arrow, right? Yeah.
No, well, in Dark Knight Returns, the better version, he used an arrow.
Oh, right, that's right.
Yeah, but this was literally just like a grenade launch, like tear gas.
Right, a cloud, yeah. Right,
yeah.
He'd walk through the cloud of it.
So there's also been this other idea of why don't why don't more moderate Muslims denounce extremism? That every time a terror attack happens, this Muslim person has the whole weight of the religion on their shoulders, and they're supposed to go, "Oh, we don't like this. We don't condone this." One, do you think that that's an accurate statement that not a lot of them do?
No, I mean, I've heard of a lot. Like I said, it's something you got to look for because it's not something that gets clicks or views or. I mean, like I said, they recently had a large amount of vandalism at a Jewish cemetery. You know, a lot of the money that was raised to fix them was done by a Muslim mosque. They raised money for it. So you do speak out. It's just not something that, just like when you have, you know, Christian radicals, you don't have, you know, moderate Christians come out and condemn it. You know what I'm saying? Kind of thing. Is this nothing?
Well, they don't. I mean, in this society, they don't have to, right? Because Christianity is the normal one.
Right. They don't yell at them to own it and stand up for it. But you also don't have it anyway. You don't have people coming out saying this is not our religion. Whereas, like I said, in Islam, like I said, they do have groups that come out and do it. Like I said, they're just, you know what I'm saying? I don't think they're really going to see it on Fox News.
Yeah.
They're certainly not going to play something like that. Well, I mean, they're still looking for the lost tapes of people celebrating 9/11 in Jersey City. So, you know, I mean, that's something that's not going to play into their narrative.
Well,
so
you were in Jersey, right?
Right. In Hoboken, yeah.
Where were they?
Trump says that they were in Jersey City.
Did you? Oh, Jersey City. Son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's where the cleric was from the first World Trade Center bombing.
Okay.
He came from Jersey City from a mosque there.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's where that whole story came from. But like you said, you know, they've never found tape or, I mean.
Yeah. So. Now, Sean Hannity actually, he falsely claimed that moderate Muslims don't speak out enough against extremism. Meanwhile, it has been documented. All you have to do is Google it, and it's right there for you from multiple sources. That they do. They say, hey, you know, this isn't Islam. This isn't us. You know. On the flip side, do you think Superman should have spoken out a little bit sooner? Now, in this movie, he's accused of crimes that somehow happened in Africa, and that he somehow had a part in. Do you think that A, he should have spoken about his innocence in that, and B, do you think he should have spoken about his innocence in the Metropolis incident?
I think he definitely should speak out about both. I think they always say, you know, that you should always speak out whenever there's a wrong that's been committed. Like I said, especially if you're the one that's being accused of it and you haven't. Like I said, he certainly should speak out in regards to specific incidents like in Africa or Metropolis. And, you know what I'm saying, in Metropolis, like I think you can kind of make the case that it's self-explanatory what happened. He was fighting Zod and stuff like that, so you kind of know where it comes from.
That's pretty straightforward. Like, I just would have wanted to have seen a scene where he's like, sorry.
Right.
Sorry that happened. I was fighting some guy who's like, I don't know. He could be a cousin for all you know, but you know, like.
Well, I think you just got to make the case.
He killed my dad.
Right. You got to make a case that the damage that would have been done without him would have been much greater, and like like I said, in anything. Like I said, even when a fire truck comes to put out the fire in your apartment building, the water's going to run down and destroy the apartment, 3 apartments underneath it. You know, so there will be damage done.
But if that shit keeps burning,
right, then you lose everything. So you kind of have to you should come out and explain to people that hey, even doing good sometimes bad happens.
Oh,
but the greater good is what's most important.
Yeah, I think he was so irresponsible with the thing that happened in Africa too, because Lois was talking to him about it when she was in the bathtub, and she was like, hey, so they think that you did this, and he's like, I don't care. He literally said, I don't care. I don't care. Let's fuck. And like that's the whole thing.
Well, I think, like I said, he probably is just tired of of dealing with it. I mean, I think it's just something that, like I said, I'm sure with the amount of times he's stepped in to help things, and like I said, things don't always work out perfectly. I think at a certain point it wears on him, and I think just the scope of it, how big it got, I think that's certainly, he just got tired of dealing with it. I think he just went into essentially like the celebrity version of wanting to hide and run away from it. You know what I'm saying? He didn't want to deal with the cameras. He didn't want to deal with anything.
He was like Britney. He wanted to just shave his head and say, listen, fuck you. I'm not going to be what you want. I don't owe you an explanation.
Right. I'm not going to live by your rules. Yeah. Like I said, he wanted people just to be, I guess happy that he was doing good. Like I said, no one's going to be perfect, and he's certainly not a perfect person, let alone, perfect Kryptonian.
Yeah.
So, he's just doesn't, I guess he doesn't want to feel like he has to apologize every single time that something bad happens when he's doing 10 times other good things on top.
That's true. I think that he is very human, and that's partially his weakness.
Right. I think that's one thing he took on from being here. He certainly took on that kind of frailty, that kind of vulnerability.
Yeah, and you even see the Man of Steel. His dad's telling him about his origins. He goes, "Can I just keep being your son?" Like, these abilities to be sent to Earth. This was something that he never asked for, but he has this immense responsibility. And just think of all the responsibility that you have. Now, if he came as an ambassador for Krypton at like even 15 to 20 years old, he knows his responsibility.
Right.
Wonder Woman knows her responsibility in the world of man at this point.
Right.
He was, he just grew up and he was like, hey,
Right, he just wanted to live his regular, normal life.
And now he's got all this pressure that's on him, which is why until he was like 35, he didn't even know what he wanted to do with his life.
Right. Well, like I said, once you open up that can, you can't, you can't go back. So like I said, so he had that, that reticence to do it. He wanted to live that normal life, for middle America. He wanted to, date his high school sweetheart and have his life and stay in his Smallville town and, and kind of do his thing. And just, eventually he came to realize that, these gifts are something he has to use for the betterment of man.
Well, quite literally, with great power comes great responsibility.
It does.
And I mean, normally, a lot of people have gripes about the death of Jonathan Kent in Man of Steel. Because do you know how he originally died in the books?
No.
And in the first movie of Christopher Reeves, his dad has a heart attack.
Right.
And that's the whole poetic irony of it, is that Superman can do all these amazing things, and yet there's still some things he can't stop, still some people he can't save. But I think that taught him the people that he can save, he should save. The bad things that he can stop, he should stop. In Man of Steel, it was a different thing because the way his father died to keep his secret.
Right.
And so he really wanted, for his entire life, I think he had to fight being a hero. Because, throughout his entire life, he kept going, the oil rig, and even as a student, saving those kids in the bus instead of letting them drown. So he's, what, fuck Clark Kent. All right, fuck him. Because in this movie, in this series, he's always wanted to be a hero. And then when he finally gets to be a hero, I don't care. I don't want this responsibility. Right.
Well, that's a typical kid.
They
want it until they got it, and then once they got it, they don't want it. Like I said, it was growing up that way when his dad would keep telling him, you can't do this, you can't do this. I mean, essentially telling the kid you should have let your schoolmates die instead of possibly exposing yourself. That I'm sure has got a way in a person. So then for them to finally kind of get past that and start acting, and then to get all of this grief in return, you're almost like, why am I bothering? I should have gone back to my quiet life and never have to deal with this. So I'm definitely, like I said, I'm sure he has that conflict in his life like that. And
well, I mean, he always does, and that's what's such a great thing about Superman, and not necessarily this Superman, but it's just something that people don't realize, which is why he's one of my favorite characters ever. Is because he does have a lot of weight on his shoulders, that he can have all these powers, but guess what? He still has emotions, right? And I don't know how much of the Justice League series you've watched, or maybe you've seen the clip where he finally gets to beat up Darkseid, which in Man of Steel we see that these kids are beating him up and everything, and that he's grabbing this fence and he's molding it in his hands in an attempt because he knows he'll fucking eviscerate this kid.
Oh yeah.
And then he has this moment later on with Zod where he's finally able to let loose, and that's in the, if you haven't seen the clip in Justice League, definitely watch it. It's awesome because Darkseid is on Earth, he's invading it, and Superman just fucking like clocks him into the middle of the city, and he's like, listen, I'm getting chills talking about it. He goes, I live in a world made of cardboard, and I always have to remember not to step out of line, because if I do something, I could break something, I could break someone. Right. But here we have a rare opportunity for me to really let loose. And so he fucking just beats the shit out of Darkseid, and it's awesome. He's like punches into one side of the city, and by the time Darkseid gets there, he's already there, and he's like boom, sledging him to the ground and everything. And then Darkseid hits him with some bullshit comic book stuff, and Superman's like, I can't take it. But before that, it was pretty cool. So wow, we really delved in there. I think in this case, Superman's responsibility, he's too powerful not to give at least a press release, a press conference. Right. All right, here's what happened. Let me know if there's anything I could have done better, but I did this, I prevented this many deaths. Boom, that's it. Go home, go to Reykjavik and go fucking party. Right. Go to Reykjavik in Iceland. However, I really don't think it's up to an entire one person to speak for an entire religion. Actually, better yet, I don't think it's up to an entire religion to speak for extremists.
Right.
Unless you're going to hold everyone to an equal standard. Unless Dylan Roof commits a mass shooting, you're going to start surveilling mosques, and you're going to ask Christian leaders to speak out against it.
Right.
You know, that's just it. It works both ways.
Oh, certainly. I mean, if you followed a true guise of equality, that would be it. I mean, in the first place, you would never get to that. But like I said, if you are, then you have to, like you said, do one, do to all. But like I said, that people are never going to agree to that because they'll see the people that are like them and give them the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. Where the people that are seen as the other will always be looked at as always having negative, negative, I guess, forces behind what they're doing. So they'll never give it that chance.
Yeah.
But I think that's certainly something that like I said, it should be equality of I guess you could certainly say like maybe persecution then at that point. Then if you're going to put all of them. For different groups, like you said, whether it's, Christian radicals blowing up, the Atlanta Olympics or blowing up Oklahoma City or blowing up, NAACP or the KKK or stuff like that, then you have to, do it to everybody. But
that's what the atheist in me says. Listen,
right.
Hold them all accountable.
Yeah.
But right now, I side with Muslims because they're the more victimized ones.
Right.
I still think that what you believe in is ridiculous, but you shouldn't be persecuted for believing in it.
Right, but it happens in all kinds of things. I mean, like I said, if you study business, you're supposed to act altruistically, but obviously people don't because they have the corruption of money.
And they're all businessmen.
Right, exactly. But like I said, they get corrupted just like someone does in a religion. They're getting corrupted in their business ethics.
Yeah.
That's why they're dumping the stuff in the water. That's why they're putting stuff that's out as no is going to hurt somebody because they prize this deviation over. The true following of what they're supposed to do. You're supposed to, as a businessman, produce goods for the betterment of society. You're not supposed to produce things that purposely are going to cause damage. Just like, when you're in a religion, you're supposed to be doing it, and most of them, like I said, the Abrahamic religion is based on love. Do unto others as you want them to do unto you. Am I my brother's keeper? Stuff like that. So, you're supposed to be taking care of each other, but there are people that look at it and find, one small line that says, oh, these people are stepping out of line. We gotta, smack them back.
And that one little thing.
Right, basically. So basically they'll corrupt everything over that one, and what they see as an infraction. Whether it's having troops in Saudi Arabia. So these people have gone too far. You have troops. Meanwhile, they were invited there by the people that are in charge of those, of that country. They see it as a violation. Or whether it was, in a sense, different areas within Christianity, they did the same kind of thing. They did it with the taking back the Middle East with the Crusades. These people are not letting me go to where I saw Jesus supposed to have walked. Now we got to take it back because they're not responsible enough to control this thing. So they'll always find a fault in somebody else and always use that as their reason to come down with a hammer on them.
If you're a violent person, it doesn't matter what your cause is. You will find a reason to justify it.
Oh, always.
And that's it. People go, oh, did this person do this bad thing because of the video games he's playing? No, he did this bad thing because he's a fucking psycho.
Because he's a bad
person. This person do bad thing because of religion? No, he did a bad thing because he's a fucking psycho and happens to be of this religion.
Right.
It doesn't mean that... it sucks a lot of groups. Everyone hates lawyers, right?
Right.
Meanwhile, did you hear about the ACLU lawyers coming to talk to people when the Muslim ban was happening, working
right.
pro bono, literally sitting on the floor with immigrants and, buying a coffee so they could stay in the airport.
Right.
Yeah. So that just about wraps up our part 1 for the Batman v Superman and its correlations to the War on Terror episode. Please tune in for part 2 where we will discuss Batman's whole part in this epic story and this allegory to the War on Terror from the DC Extended Universe. For the PolitiPop Podcast, I've been Mike Booch, and he's been
Joe.
Nice and simple. You got one name. You're like Seal.
Exactly.
In the meantime, you can contact us on Twitter at PolitiPopPod. Feel free to send us your thoughts using politipopcast@gmail.com, and look at our show notes and sources on politipoppodcast.wordpress.com. Keep learning, keep thinking, no matter what you see or read or whatever, read between the lines.